Good evening. Customs officers are investigating a case involving the labeling of a herbal turtle jelly product. Authorities are trying to find out if the company involved breached the amended trade descriptions ordinance. Rani Samtani has more details.
Customs officers are investigating an herbal chain store over allegations that its herbal turtle jelly product doesn't contain a key ingredient, turtle shell collagen, as labeled. Customs Chief Clement Chung said they have contacted the manufacturer to obtain more information and samples for testing. And because the medicinal item is very popular in Hong Kong, Chung says the department has made it a high priority to investigate if the product breaches the trade descriptions ordinance. The company in question, Hoi Tin Tong, today expressed regret for the public concern sparked by the case. And it denies any wrongdoing. Customs officers have been cracking down on businesses that violate the new consumer protection regulations. But Chung believes some businesses are making an effort to change the way they promote and sell products and services.
In some of the travel agencies, some of the airlines, they used to omit the fuel surcharge, they used to omit airport tax, but now they have the whole thing embodied in the price tag. I have funny things in the beauty salons, like permanent epilation. Now it's not permanent anymore. They tell you exactly how long it's expected to last.
The department has received hundreds of complaints and more than 3,000 inquiries since the amendment came into effect in July. Legal experts advise traders to train their staff so they understand how the amended ordinance may apply to their businesses. Meanwhile, Customs have agreed to keep refining the enforcement guidelines and to give more examples of cases that constitute a criminal offense. Rani Samtani, TVB News.
A High Court judge has rejected a bid by the government to seek a retrial of an Apple Daily photographer for assault. The judge criticised the Department of Justice for nitpicking. Gary Singh had been charged with assault after a confrontation with a security guard at the central government offices in January last year while he was trying to photograph a government minister. An Eastern Court magistrate found Singh not guilty in December, saying he could not rule out the possibility that Singh had acted in self-defense, as the guard could be seen rushing towards him in security camera footage. In filing the appeal last month, the Department of Justice argued that the magistrate had misinterpreted the security guard's testimony, which led to a flawed verdict. But Court of First Instance Judge Maggie Poon upheld the original verdict in a written judgment handed down today, defending the magistrate's assessment of the witness that his testimony was unreliable. Poon also rejected claims by the prosecution that the magistrate had reached his conclusion based on speculation not backed by evidence, saying that he had relied on facts based on video evidence. The judge went on to criticise government prosecutors for nitpicking and overreaching as it tried to push for justice. The Department of Justice said it is now studying the judgment to decide what to do next. Singh said today the case may have been politically motivated, as authorities spent nearly 2 years trying to nail him over what he describes as a relatively trivial case. The sentiment was echoed in a joint statement released by the Hong Kong Journalists Association and Press Photographers Association, which welcomed today's ruling. It also said that the root of the problem, poor press arrangements at the government offices, was not yet resolved, and called on the government to stop restricting press freedom.
Former Director of Public Prosecutions Kevin Zervos has been appointed a judge of the Court of First Instance. Zervos, who earlier retired from the Department of Justice, will take up his new post next Monday. He became Director of Public Prosecutions in 2011. Because of his prior position, Zervos will not be dealing with any cases that involve the government in his first 6 months as a judge.
One member of the LegCo Public Accounts Committee says there could be discrepancies between the findings of an investigation into former ICAC Commissioner Timothy Tong and what he said while being grilled by legislators. Tong may now have to be summoned to more public hearings over lavish hospitality spending. Shaw De Silva reports.
Fallout today from a report released yesterday about the lavish hospitality spending by former ICAC chief Timothy Tong. The report said Tong breached regulations on dozens of occasions. But that's not all. The vice chairman of LegCo's Public Accounts Committee, which is conducting its own investigation, thinks there may have been discrepancies between the conclusions in the report and Tong's statements at the committee hearings.
Certainly, according to the report, there have been a number of areas where there are contradictions between the evidence given by Mr. Timothy Tong during the hearing of the PAC and as compared with, obviously, the sort of findings of the independent committee.
But Public Accounts Committee Chairman Abraham Sheikh thinks it's too early to say whether there indeed were any discrepancies. He admits, however, that the committee will have to follow up on the case.
So we have to go through the whole process and see that whether that situation arises. If it arises, there is a need for further clarification. We can either do it through correspondence. And if we further see that there would be a need for a public hearing or two public hearings to follow up with the information, or there is any discrepancy to those information, we would do it.
The Democratic Party warned Tong could face serious consequences if he's found to have lied to legislators and violated LegCo's powers and privileges ordinance.
Any person give a false answer or any question material to the subject of inquiry, may have committed an offense of false evidence and deception, which is a perjury offense.
Besides being the target of Independent Review Committee and Public Accounts Committee probes, Timothy Tong is also being investigated by the anti-graft agency he used to lead. João da Silva, TVB News.
President Xi Jinping has attended the 13th Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which opened in Kyrgyzstan today. Regional issues, as well as the Syrian conflict, were discussed. Leaders of member states are today signing a joint declaration and ratifying a series of documents. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization was founded more than a decade ago and is aimed at promoting cooperation within the group. It consists of China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. Afghanistan, India, Iran, Mongolia, and Pakistan serve as observers, while Belarus, Sri Lanka, and Turkey are dialogue partners.
In Taiwan, a legal victory for Legislative Yuan Speaker Wang Jinping in his challenge against a decision by the ruling Kuomintang to expel him. A court in Taipei today granted an injunction sought by Wang against the expulsion. The ruling means Wang will also stay on as parliamentary speaker, at least for now. The KMT is expected to appeal against today's judgment. The party expelled Wang earlier this week for allegedly pressuring prosecutors not to appeal the acquittal of an opposition lawmaker in a breach of trust case.
At least 3 people were killed in a U.S. consulate in western Afghanistan when insurgents detonated a truck bomb outside the front gates. The bombing was followed by a gun battle between security forces and the insurgents. 2 police officers and a security guard were killed in the attack in the city of Herat. A spokesman for the consulate says all U.S. personnel were safe and accounted for. The attack, claimed by the Taliban, underscores the worrying security picture as Afghan forces prepare to take over from foreign combat troops.
A judge in India today sentenced to death 4 men convicted in the deadly gang rape of a young woman last December. The brutal rape on a moving bus left the young woman with such severe internal injuries that she died 2 weeks later. The case was closely watched across India, seen as a reflection of the rampant mistreatment of women and the government's inability to deal with crime. It sparked widespread outrage and moved the Indian government to toughen up its rape laws. As with all death sentences in India, the judge's order has to be confirmed by the country's High Court. Welcome back. A newly built community hospital on Lantau will open its doors later this month. But as Vicky Kung reports, it'll be a while before full services are available.
The North Lantau Hospital in Tung Chung is aimed at serving the needs of residents of the island. But it says it needs 650 staff if it wants to provide round-the-clock accident and emergency services, as well as clinical consultations and accommodation for patients. For now, the hospital authority has recruited only about 200 employees, including more than a dozen doctors and 60 to 70 nurses. And general wards are yet to be fully furnished.
In full service, we'll have 160 inpatient beds. In both acute care and extended care. And we will also have some day beds and also some day rehabilitation places to cater for not just inpatients, but patients receiving daycare in this hospital.
When the hospital opens on September 24th, it will offer 8 hours of accident and emergency services each day. That will be extended to 16 hours a day by the beginning of next year. And when A&E services are not available, patients would be redirected to other hospitals, such as Princess Margaret Hospital. The last hospital the government built was that in Cheng Kwan O 14 years ago. Authorities expect this new hospital to start providing 24/7 accident and emergency services from mid-2014. Vicky Kung, TVB News.
The Democratic Party has voiced opposition to the possible conversion of country parkland for residential use. As Stephanie Choi reports, the government is still trying to come up with ways to boost land supply.
The Housing Authority announced today a Yuen Long plot that's currently used for interim housing would be converted to building publicly run flats instead. It could provide 2,000 to 3,000 units. Meanwhile, debate rages on suggestions to build homes in country parks. Wu Chi-wai of the Democratic Party today voiced opposition to the idea.
Once you have that kind of thinking, that will be a cancer.
The Democratic Party believes that the government should exhaust all possibilities before setting their sights on country parks. Aside from the fact that country parks should be reserved for public leisure, the party said that there are other considerations.
The country park is located at the hillside, and you will encounter, very, very difficult, engineering problems.
Wu pointed out alternative sites such as South Kam Tin and Tai Tong. By acting according to the Land Resumption Ordinance, the government would be able to balance the interests of both property developers and the 470,000 households waiting for accommodation. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
Britain's Prince William has officially finished his military tour of duty to focus on royal duties and charity work. As Sonia Artero reports, the Prince wasted no time as he and Duchess of Cambridge got busy raising awareness at a conservation awards ceremony in London.
Perilous missions of piloting a Royal Air Force helicopter are over for Prince William. Completing 156 search and rescue operations and 1,300 hours of flying brings to an official close the military phase of William's royal duties. The prince will now focus his attention on conservation, particularly in the wildlife protection of endangered species, which he has a real passion for. A need to protect the vulnerable intensified with the birth of his son, Prince George, which is why this charity holds such deep meaning for the Duke of Cambridge.
Suddenly, as a parent now, he's wondering about what's the heritage that we are leaving, the next generation.
While presenting awards at last night's Tusk Conservation Awards ceremony in London, William joked about it being their first night away from the baby.
Please excuse us if you see us nervously casting cheeky glances at our mobile phones to check all is well back home.
A spokesperson for the prince confirms he is considering a future role in public service and will not venture into full-time royal duties just yet. Sonia Artero, TVB News.
Deadly floods have overwhelmed the U.S. state of Colorado, where the death toll now stands at 3. Thousands of people have been evacuated, and the National Guard was called in to help with rescue efforts. The worst of the damage was in Boulder, where flash floods washed away homes, cars, roads and bridges. Dive teams were called in to perform rescues. President Barack Obama signed an emergency declaration to step up disaster relief efforts. Record rains have caused 12 dams to overflow, triggering several mudslides. One person was killed when a structure collapsed. Another man drowned in floodwaters, and a woman was swept away in a vehicle. Forecasters say it's not over yet. The heavy rains are expected to continue. And finally, a man using hundreds of helium-filled balloons lifted off in the U.S. state of Maine yesterday with the hope of crossing the Atlantic Ocean. About 150 volunteers assisted Jonathan Trapp in filling more than 300 helium balloons. Wishing him well on his journey was Joe Kittinger, who was the first solo balloonist to cross the Atlantic in 1984. Trapp hopes to be the first person to do it using a cluster balloon system. For his transatlantic crossing, the basket he's riding in is actually a lifeboat that could be used if he ditches in the ocean. If all goes according to plan, the feat could take 3 to 6 days. But if wind currents blow the wrong way, he could wind up in northern Africa or Norway. And that's the news for tonight.
Good night.